Hi, everyone. My name is Gary Wan, and I am the Outreach Director for the Sungshin Association of Hawaii. I want to thank you for joining us on this Saturday. We have this terrific webinar to present to you folks today. It's called Through the Ages, where we look at historic Honolulu Chinatown. We have two great speakers. One is Gary Coover, who is the author of Honolulu Chinatown, 200 Years of Red Lanterns and Red Lights. He's going to be looking at the past during the time of the fires all the way and bring us all the way up to the present. And then we have a special guest, Mayor Rick Blangiardi, who's going to be talking about what a lot of the things that are happening in Chinatown right now and some of the amazing future plans set for the district. So please stay and listen to all of that. We have a Q&A right after that with Gary. And but a little housekeeping I want to do in the beginning. Make sure all of you are muted. We don't want to have any kind of crosstalk during the presentation. The other thing is when we do get to the Q&A portion, on the bottom of the Zoom, you'll see a little area where it says reactions. Just click on that. You'll see a little yellow hand. Click on that if you want to ask a question. And what happens is that when we see that, we'll call you up, you unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question. Okay. So as the webinar is going on, you have some questions, jot it down, and we'll get to those right afterwards. Okay. Anyway, so without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce you to the president of Sungshin, Edwina Lee. Edwina.
Thank you, Gary. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. My name is Edwina Lee, and I am the current president of the Sungshin Association here in Hawaii. I am so pleased to welcome all of you to our webinar, where we look at the past, present, and future of one of the most historically interesting neighborhoods in our state. I am honored that our new mayor, Rick Blangiardi, will be sharing his exciting vision for the revitalization of Chinatown later in this talk. Along with this rebirth of this culturally significant part of Honolulu, our 100-plus-year-old organization is also changing too. At this time, I would like to have one of our past presidents of Sungshin Association, Dr. Nancy Chong Whitman, who will be sharing with you briefly about the history of our club. Nancy?
Thank you, Edwina. This is Nancy Chong Whitman. I am the past president of Sungshin Association. This association is a nonprofit organization that promotes the education of the Hakka people's culture and history. Initially, it was a fraternal organization that helped Hakka immigrants adjust to their new circumstances. Today, we are excited about providing more social, educational, and charitable activities for peoples in Hawaii and worldwide. We are planning more workshops and more webinars like these that we are presenting today. Our building is located in Chinatown's historical district. In 1973, it was listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. Our address is 1159 Mauna Kea Street. It's a block away from the Wolfat building and around the corner from Chahung Sut, a shop known for its dim sum. Our building is located in what's called Chinatown Special District. This district was so designated by the city and county of Honolulu in 2016. Our building is considered of very high significance, historically, culturally, and architecturally. Although our building was built in 1916, it was not until 1937 that Sungshin purchased it. So this building is now 106 years old, and we've been at this location for about 85 years. The upstairs of this building is used as our clubhouse, and downstairs has been rented to small businesses like restaurants and an acupuncture clinic that sells traditional Chinese medicine in addition. This clinic, interestingly, has also been the background for a number of Hawaii Five-0 programs. Today, this is our building. Over 100 years of wear and tear, we are currently repairing, restoring, and renovating this building. We are excited about moving into the 21st century with all the changes going on. We hope you will help us with donations to our building fund. Donors of 100 or more will receive a copy of our speaker's book about Chinatown in Honolulu.
Thank you, Nancy. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce you all to Kirsten Faulkner of the Hawaii Historic Foundation. Kirsten?
I'm Kirsten Faulkner, Executive Director of Historic Hawaii Foundation. Historic Hawaii is a statewide nonprofit organization. It was founded in 1974, and we help people preserve and tell the stories of historic places all across the islands. Honolulu's Chinatown is the oldest and largest Chinatown in the United States. It was designated on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973 as a National Historic District, and then it was also listed on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places in 1985. The Statement of Historic Significance that listed Chinatown on the National Register notes that a portion of Honolulu immediately adjacent to the harbor at the mouth of Nu'uanu streams holds the longest continuous history of native and immigrant settlement, and where the story of Hawaii's common folk has been most compactly unfolded. The Chinatown Historic District reflects vividly in its buildings, institutions, and people the full impact of the city's role as a center of attraction for many diverse races and cultures. In recognition of the historic significance and the architectural character, Chinatown was designated as a special district in the city's land use ordinance. The city adopted special district design guidelines in 1991, and the purpose of the special district include to preserve and enhance the historic character of Chinatown, to retain the low-rise urban form and character of the historic interior, while also allowing for moderate redevelopment on the edges, to preserve and restore buildings and sites of historic, cultural, and architectural significance, and to encourage compatible development that complements these buildings. In addition to these design guidelines and land use ordinance rules and regulations, the city has also offered tax incentives and ways to support property owners and developers as they work to adaptively reuse and preserve and protect these historic buildings. There are property tax incentives as well as federal tax credits to help with rehabilitation and restoration of some of the most historic buildings in the district. These kinds of programs really reflect on how important this place is to the people, to the city itself, to the islands, and it serves as a reminder of where we came from. What are the people, the events, the buildings, the engineering that have led to this special place still being with us? Honolulu Chinatown, 200 Years of Red Lanterns and Red Lights is a nonfiction book. It includes historic information on every building in Chinatown. It's a strong resource for researchers and anyone who wants to learn more about the people, the places, and events that shape this historic district. It incorporates technology with the use of QR codes, enabling the reader to listen and watch audio and videos of musical recordings, historical presentations, and archival film footage. It is a pleasure to introduce the author of that book. Gary R. Coover was trained and licensed as a site civil engineer. He has a long and keen interest in the history of the built environment. Gary is a wonderful guide. He's going to take us through some of the most important and interesting pieces of history, and we look forward to hearing from him. Thank you, Gary.
Well, welcome everybody. I appreciate you spending your Saturday with us. We're going to have a wonderful trip through Chinatown, through Honolulu's Chinatown. The reason I wrote the book, just briefly, is I was approached by the folks at HART, the rail project people here, about doing yet another tour of Chinatown as one of their mitigation requirements. And I had done a similar project in Fayetteville, Arkansas with QR codes for the downtown square, and also done historical research in Houston, and thought that, okay, 30, 40 buildings, we can put together a tour, just loan me the data. The data for Chinatown here, no one had ever actually written a history of Chinatown and of its buildings before. And so the data was all over the place. And so I decided I needed to go back to original sources and do some research. So let's take a little chronological tour of what I found in Chinatown, some wonderful discoveries. Let me see if I can do a share screen here. So anyway, this is a classic shot of Chinatown, the WOFAT building, the CU building, and plus a high rise in the background. Chinatown has gone through constant change its entire history. And this is a reflection of the many different styles of buildings that have come and gone. And the mayor will be talking a little bit later, just about some of the historical things that are, or some of the new things that will be historical in the future. So special thanks to the Sungsin Association for putting on this webinar. So real quick, when you hear the name Chinatown, what do you think of? I mean, Chinatown means different things to different people. It's a really diverse part of downtown Honolulu. It's been by the docks, by the harbors, sorts of immigrants, waves of immigrants have come in over the years. The first Chinese in Honolulu were first here in 1789. That was three Chinese cooks on board a ship. And in 1847, there were 350 registered foreigners in Honolulu, and 12 of those were Chinese. Now, in 1852, the first Chinese laborers came in to work the plantations, the sugar plantations, and that opened up a floodgate of immigration. And by, the 1880s, so many had come in, they actually had a Chinese Exclusion Act because they were afraid, wait a minute, they're 20% of the population. So they started bringing in Japanese and Portuguese and all sorts of other different workers for the plantations. The first mention of Chinatown is in 1876 in the newspapers. And this is the area we're talking about, kind of between Nuuanu and Nuuanu Stream or River Street, and between Beretania and Honolulu Harbor. Where I found my data was I went to fire insurance maps. They date back to 1879 and later. Old historical photographs from the Hawaii State Archives, the Bishop Museum, as well as going through daily newspapers. And that's where the really good stories were in the newspapers. So the first houses in Chinatown looked like this. A writer in 1828 said it looked like a mass of brown huts looking like so many haystacks in the country. Not one white cottage, no church spire, not a garden, nor a tree to be seen, save the grove of coconuts. And at the lower left-hand corner of your screen is a reconstruction of Honolulu in 1810. And this is the Chinatown area right now, today, this area. And they would have all been grass huts. So by 1854, this is what downtown Honolulu looked like, the harbor. Chinatown is way off to the left of the upper screen. On the lower end, it's kind of to the middle to the left. You're not seeing the grass huts, but you're seeing now we have proper big buildings. So 1852, the first Chinese laborers came in to work the fields. They had basically a 3-year contract, and a lot of them chose to stay. And they lived in housing that looked very much like this. Quickly thrown together wooden housing, generally overhanging balconies, narrow streets, interior courtyards, and in these interior courtyards where you had the cooking, the washing, things like that, and the socializing as well. So there are also substantial buildings in Chinatown, as there are today. This particular one, it was interesting. When I was first putting together the walking tour, I totally ignored this building. I was thinking, well, this is, not that, sorry, but not that great a looking building. Turns out it was remodeled in 1839 by Young Tuk Char, Chinese architect here in Hawaii. But the building Can anyone guess when this was built? This was the biggest surprise of all the research. It was actually started in September of 1863 and was completed in January of 1864 for shipbuilder James Robinson. It's built of coral blocks and hand-cut coral blocks. And King Kalakaua has actually been in this building. But it didn't always look like this. When it was first built, this is what it looked like. The gentleman at the top is Theodor C. Hoik. He was a German architect who lived here in Honolulu, later designed the Iolani Barracks. But the most famous occupant of this building is the gentleman on the lower right. There's Chun Afong. He was the first Chinese millionaire. He was a businessman that was involved in sugar plantations, importing Chinese labor. He had dry goods business. He had importing business. He also had the official opium license, which they could not sell opium to the Haoles or the white folks, but they could sell to the Chinese. And he made a lot of money from that. And this is where he officed at the Robinson Building. Interesting thing about this building, they only remodeled basically two sides of it. And if you go today to the left-hand side of this building and look up, you're looking at 1864. It's unchanged, absolutely amazing. Here's another building I really wasn't too excited about when I first saw it. It's been known as the Laifong Building since 1947. Laifong was a daughter of a village chief in China, and she was a picture bride, married one of the soldiers who fought with Sun Yat-sen, and she came here to open up a clothing store where she did her own sewing for gowns and kimonos, and she sold Chinese goods and screens and all. But this building didn't always look like this. I was real surprised that when it was first built, it looked like this. And it was built in 1880. It was one of the first brick buildings in Chinatown. And it housed the Hollister Drug Company on one side, and it housed the Gu Kim dry goods store on the other. Gu Kim was one of the leaders in the Chinese community here. But the reason this building doesn't look like this anymore is because of this. Pagao, Fantan, Chifa, and Pakapio. Some of you may know these. These were games back in the day. When you have a culture that really values money and really values luck, you are going to have gambling. And there was a lot of gambling in Chinatown. And the reason that the building looks the way it does today is the game on the lower left is Chifa. It's probably Chifa or Pakapio. It's a guessing game. There's a riddle is put out into the community. You guess what that riddle might be. I mean, the riddle might be over, under, and around. And you say, well, that could be smoke. It could be a honeybee. Maybe it's a spider. And you put money down. And if you guess the winning one, you win 30-to-1 odds. So there's little strips of paper. Well, there was a restaurant, large Chinese restaurant at the corner of Smith and Hotel at the time. And upstairs, they were bringing in the gambling results. A dispute arose. The pieces of paper got thrown into the fire. A fight broke out. The fire spread across the room, and it ended up spreading over 20 acres of Chinatown on April 18th, 1886. Destroyed pretty much everything. What you see in the picture up above is the United Chinese Society building. Is a smoldering ruin. The view down below is looking down King Street from the Robinson building. Massive devastation. And so the first buildings that were built back, the one on the top, which was the first building that came back from the 1886 fire, it was built in 6 weeks and a day. It was the Cosmopolitan Saloon, and but not just a saloon, it was a fancy place. It was wainscoted with redwood and black walnut. It had a big black walnut bar and had really fancy food. The menu once was listed as being roast goose with sage and onions and crab salad with all the et ceteras. And it was later a shoe store. Down the lower left is the United Chinese Society building. And on the right is the building by a gentleman named Aswan. One of the things you find in Cantonese often is people will use ah in front of someone's first name. It'd be like calling me Mr. Gary, you call somebody Ah Swan. And he was a very prominent business owner in Chinatown. He also had some sugar plantations. He was probably the largest user of opium. There was a raid on December 23rd, 1896, where the police, if you're looking at this picture at the lower right corner, policemen were climbing across the roof of the adjacent building in 1896 with crowbars, and they dropped in and caught Aswan smoking opium in his office. They caught him numerous times, but they also hired him to test opium in the courts as an expert witness. So kind of interesting that he was on both sides of the law. Well, there were still a lot of wooden buildings in Chinatown, even after the 86 fire. They created a fire limit line about halfway through Chinatown. The ones on the right had to be brick, the ones on the left could be whatever. And these are what the buildings typically looked like. This is upper left is the Kobayashi Hotel on Smith Street. The Beehive was on Duanu. Lower left is on Pauahi Street, and the upper right is the corner of Beretania and Duanu. Now, there was a lot of Japanese immigration after the 1885 was the first group of official first group of Japanese workers. There was an earlier group that didn't work out, but the main wave started in 1885, and there were 943 immigrants on that first ship, the Tokyo, and there were 60,000 Japanese in Hawaii by 1900. And these are some of their buildings. The Tajiro Samita had a liquor store at Mauna Kea and Pauahi. S. Kimura also had a wholesale liquor store on Nuanu Street. The Nippujiji newspaper was based in the building on the lower left, and in the lower right was the Hawaii Hochisha newspaper. And all four of these buildings are still in Chinatown today. Now, in late 1899, bubonic plague had been sweeping through the Pacific, and they had hit Hawaii, but they did notice a lot of rats were suddenly dying around the harbor. No one quite knew what that was all about until all of a sudden in early December of 1899, a 20-year-old bookkeeper with the Wingwo Tai Company was diagnosed with bubonic plague, and he died the next day. This threw the city into a panic. The Board of Health basically took over the government, and they decided the best way to rid the city of the pestilence was to burn places where somebody had contracted bubonic plague. So what we're seeing here is the very first building that was burned. This was December 31st, 1899, at the corner of Nuanu and Pauahi. Pauahi didn't go through at that point in time, so this is kind of right in front of Mark's garage where the building is burned. And the photograph on the left is the crowd watching this very scene as the fire is destroying the building. The next day, they burned this building at Mauna Kea and Pauahi. And the fire hose is being used to wet down the buildings adjacent so they don't burn. They were trying to very carefully control their burns to only burn the affected building. Well, this is a map of the fires in Chinatown. There was not just one fire in 1900. There were 9 of them. And the orange areas are the areas that were burned by the Board of Health. Like I say, they started with individual buildings. They ended up going to entire blocks. And then on January 20th, 1900, they were burning some buildings kind of back behind the Kamakapili Church. The wind suddenly changed, and it became a roaring wind. It caught the steeple of the church on fire, and no matter how hard they tried, they could not reach to the steeple with their fire hoses. And the steeple acted like a sparkler, and it basically showered sparks through half of Chinatown and set basically everything else in Chinatown on fire. So that yellow area, it's almost 30 acres that were burned by this accidental fire that was set by the Board of Health. And here's what it looked like when it first started. This is a picture was taken from across Nuanu Stream, right about Beretania, at the old St. Louis School. Here's the fire getting a little bit way out of control. This is that same scene. This is the aftermath. So that was what was there before. A few hours later, almost nothing. A very sad part about this. So Chinatown had been fenced off. People weren't allowed to leave because of plague. And so all of a sudden, Chinatown is on fire. It's full of plague and it's on fire. And they weren't letting people out. People were gathering at the gate and trying to get out of Chinatown, and folks wouldn't let them out because they were afraid of plague. Well, they finally decided that they had to let some people out, and they created a pathway to Kauai Church, which was sort of the, I guess, the area for a safe area where they could keep them. But they made sure that nobody strayed. And as you can see, that one of the gentlemen here in the photograph, he's holding an axe handle. People were holding bats, axe handles, to make sure that nobody left as they were being paraded from Chinatown to Kauai Church. And that had to have been just an unbelievably humiliating experience. We're talking about people who are scared of plague, they're scared of fire. Many of them do not speak English. Some of them had bound feet. And here they are being treated like cattle. It's just, I don't know, I get choked up just thinking about it. Just really, really difficult situation that they went through to escape the fire. Well, there was a fire station in that area, but it also got burned. It was called the China Engine Company. It was actually, they were pretty much the best firemen in all of Honolulu. They had the first brick fire station in recognition of their efforts, but it was no match for the fire. And the church also did not survive. It replaced a massive adobe building. It was built in 1839. This was officially dedicated in 1888. It has two steeples because King Kalakaua said that a man has two arms, two eyes, two ears, and two legs. Therefore, a church ought to have two steeples. Now, inside this church was this absolutely magnificent Bevington and Sons pipe organ. It had 26 ranks, over 1,200 pipes, 2 rows of keys. It was completed in London in 1887, and the test recital was given by the organist of Westminster Abbey, with Queen Kapiolani in attendance. And then it was shipped over here, and unfortunately it did not survive the fire. So here's another shot of the fire station from a distance, and also of the church and what survived of that. So in 1900, right after the fire, they would not let anyone build for a while until things had calmed down, and they thought that the land was safe. The plague finally passed. And so Joseph Mendonça built 2 very large buildings in Chinatown on the ashes. Young Anin, or Yong Nin, which is Chinese name, but he was known as Young Anin here, built a really massive block at Mauna Kea and King. Only parts of this building have survived. So this is King Street in 1906. They've rebuilt back mostly pretty much all in brick. And wouldn't it be great if we could sort of put this picture in motion and take a trip down King Street and just see what Honolulu looked like in 1906? Well, we can, because Robert Bonin put a camera, a 35mm camera, on a streetcar. So this is King Street. We're coming up on Nuanu. That is where the carriage is just now crossing. Robinson Building on the left, Mendonça Building on the right. The C.S. Wo first building they were in is on the left. The Yim Kwan Building, where Smith & King's Bar is now, is there on the left. The CQ Yeehop Plaza building, built in the 60s, is on this corner now on the left. And then we're coming up on the King Market, the Oahu Market, which is still there today, and then the Lee Lett Building, and then the Winston Building. And then just down from this is another building called the Armstrong Building, built in 1905. And this gentleman lived in that building briefly in 1910. Most of you probably recognize him. This is Dr. Sun Yat-sen. He actually went to school at Iolani here in Honolulu. And they talk a lot about, the overthrow of the monarchy here in Hawaii in 1893. But I don't know, I'm almost more impressed with the fact that the Dr. Sun Yat-sen, with a lot of help from the Honolulu Chinese community, he overthrew the Qing dynasty in China in 1911, and he's considered the father of modern China. A very, very impressive feat. He was in Honolulu and in Chinatown at several places. There are statues to him in Chinatown today. And this is one of the places where he briefly lived. Well, several Chinese businessmen got together and said, well, we need to support Chinese business, not just the general businesses in Honolulu, but we need to support our fellow businessmen. So Chu Gim, Gu Kim, let's see, Sharpong Chong, Wang Char, and let's see who else, Ching Shai formed the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. And in 1915, they started building this building on Mauna Kea Street and dedicated it and moved in February of 1916. And it says reception by celestial merchants. And that's a phrase I found in the early newspapers where China was known as the celestial empire at the time. And so a lot of people referred to the Chinese as celestials. I think that's kind of cool. I'm kind of sorry we've lost that. I think that's a very lofty, very nice name. But anyway, this building became the building from the Tsungsin Association. They moved in the 1930s, and you can see a picture on the left with too bad there's not sound to go with that, because there's a lot of fireworks going off when they're celebrating it. Something I forgot to mention, during the fires, during the 1900 fire, that was in January, that was right before Chinese New Year. So a lot of the buildings that caught fire were full of fireworks. So it wasn't just a building burning down, it was a building that was exploding. And there were several times that the firemen were frightened away from the building from exploding kerosene cans as well as exploding fireworks. So this is the Tsungsin Association today. I've not been able to find out who the architect was. I have some suspects, but just a delightful building, and they are currently campaigning to rehabilitate and restore the building and put on a new roof. And they'll be telling you a little bit later about how you can help do that. Another interesting site, which now is just a parking lot, was it was the Liberty Theater, and before that, it was the house of Queen Emma. This is up on northern part of Nuuanu Street. It was the Charles Rook House built in the 1830s. Queen Emma was raised in that house as a Hanai daughter. A Hanai daughter in Hawaii is someone who's adopted as if they were your own child. And when that house eventually fell into disrepair, it was demolished and the Liberty Theater was constructed there. And they had everything from trained leopards to vaudeville performances. Mei Lon Fong performed for a week at the Liberty Theater, and he's not well known today, but at the time, they said he was the finest Chinese actor in 400 years. And there are some videos on YouTube of Mei Lon Fong. It's worth checking out. But he performed at the Liberty Theater, as did the English contralto Dame Clara Butt. It was a very famous place. It was torn down in 1990 for a temporary parking lot that is still there today. Well, one of the most famous buildings in Chinatown, of course, is the Wo Fat building. And I kind of consider this building to be sort of the spiritual center of Chinatown. It was built in 1938, designed by Yuk-Tung Char, and very much in sort of a Chinese style. It was a very, very famous restaurant. Up on the very top, that octagonal corner room was the Dragon Room, and you could rent that for special occasions. The restaurant hosted all kinds of royalty, movie stars, you name it. It was one of the top restaurants in Honolulu for many, many years, up until the 1990s. And it's currently being restored and turned into a boutique hotel. So it's currently under construction right now. So hopefully that will help really revitalize a lot of Chinatown. Right next door to that building is the Lum Yip Key building that was built a year before, 1936. Coming into the 1930s, 1940s, there are a lot of servicemen in Chinatown and in Honolulu, and they're looking for a good time. And Hotel Street had a lot of bars, a lot of amusement places where they can play games, have their picture taken with a hula girl, with Princess Papuli, games of chance, they were bowling, all kind of things. There were bars for drinking. There's places to get tattooed. And then there were these places that were illegal, but they were regulated by the police. The idea being that with all these lusty servicemen in town, you need to protect the women folk, the local women folk, save our daughters, save our wives. And so they allowed brothels to operate in Chinatown, which was actually not a new thing. In the late 1800s, the area along Pauahi Street was funny. They did a write-up in the newspaper talking about all these places were brothels. And it's like, yeah, you just gave everybody a map of where to go. And that was the area, they referred to them as Yoshiwara women. A lot of the Japanese women in the interiors of the blocks were running houses of prostitution. And in the 1930s and 40s, it was interesting because it was mainly women that were from the mainland who were brought in. And the photograph on the left is an actual photograph from a sailor's photo album. And these guys are waiting their turn to climb the stairs. It was $3 for 3 minutes. And all of these buildings, the second floor was pretty much the Pacific rooms, the camp rooms, the service rooms, you name it. There were probably a dozen different brothels. The one at the top of the picture had 15 people working there. That was the largest. And I kid you not, they made a lot of money. There was a lot of money made during this. And the local merchants loved it because the women bought fancy jewelry, they bought fancy clothes. Some of them bought war bonds. A lot of them bought war bonds, in fact. A lot of them bought property. They weren't allowed to be outside of Chinatown. They weren't supposed to be seen in Waikiki and other places, but they did get out. They did spend their money locally. Now, at the very top was called the New Senator Hotel. And a guy named James Jones was shall we say, frequent customer. He was also a novelist. He wrote a book that was called From Here to Eternity. And that book wanted to become a movie that won 8 Academy Awards, starring Burt Lancaster, Montgomery Clift, Deborah Carr, Frank Sinatra, Donna Reed. Now, it wasn't filmed in Chinatown. It was all done on a Hollywood set. But the funny thing is they instead of calling it the New Senator Hotel, they called it the New Congress Hotel. And I think that's even funnier. I mean, I think that's just, the double entendre is just fantastic. Well, Jean O'Hara worked at a different place in Chinatown. She published an expose of the whole business. She got crossways with the police, got upset, published an expose about how it all worked. And that kind of led to the eventual decline and the banishment of the brothels in 1944. They were all ordered to close, and the women all went back to the mainland. And then everything from then on, I guess, went pretty much underground. Now in Chinatown, a lot of the businesses now turned more to entertainment. This was the Brown Derby. It was located on Nuuanu Street. There's just a courtyard in front of a dim sum restaurant there now. Building's long gone. But I was surprised to find that Billie Holiday performed there for a week, as did Louis Armstrong, Dinah Shore, Carmen McRae. It was described as the house of jive, where even the squares jump round. One of the places a lot of people are familiar with is Club Hubba Hubba on Hotel Street. Now, the building was actually built in 1886 for a Supreme Court judge, Richard Bickerton. And it originally housed a store and then a sandwich shop. Then the sandwich shop became Cafe Hubba Hubba. And they had hillbilly music. That was a big thing in the 40s and early 50s. By the mid 50s, it became Club Hubba Hubba, and it had a review of Japanese dancers. Well, that kind of turned to burlesque by the late 50s, And I love the fact that for some reason an accordion is considered a sexy instrument in the 50s. I never would have guessed that. And then by the 60s, we're talking strippers galore. And it was a legendary place for that. They a dancer there once asked the night manager for a glass of water and was told, get a customer to buy it for you. Now, many of the dancers lived upstairs, and in later days, the club was described as grossly accented with the miasma of stale beer, cigarette smoke, roach spray, cheap perfume, and pine sol. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? 2 doors down was the Swing Club. This was a hugely popular club with the servicemen. The building was built by Chinese builders in 1886, right after the fire, and originally housed 3 stores, 3 Chinese stores and a Japanese store. It was full of amusement centers in the 40s, and the Swing Club opened in 1955, and it was billed as the only place where the happenings are always happening. And the downstairs originally had guest musicians and a house band. By the 60s, they had go-go girls in cages. One of the more unusual acts was Little Johnny Shaw, described as 36 inches tall and full of soul, the James Brown of the Dwarf set. Now, by 1970s, it became an X-rated live sex nightclub with X-rated movies upstairs and a live show downstairs. And in 1971, 26-year-old future porn star John Holmes was arrested for lewd acts on stage. He went on to make over 600 pornographic movies once he moved back to the mainland. And then further down Hotel Street was the Glade Club, the infamous Glade Club, kind of at the head of Kalkalike Street. It featured live music and floor shows with female impersonators from 1964 to 1980. The master of ceremonies was a big guy named Liko Johnson, 6 feet tall, 266 pounds, with pancake makeup, a knee-length muumuu, falsies, fake eyelashes, gobs of purple black eyeshadow, a woman's wig, and a huge orchid over his left ear. And their advertising slogan was "Boys will be girls." And that was kind of a big thing in the late 60s, early 70s in Chinatown, especially Hotel Street. A lot of transvestites, or people who are known as mahu here in Hawaii, were going to a lot of the clubs. There was a club across the street from this that had drag floor shows. In fact, the city passed a law saying that any transvestite is required to wear a button that says, "I am a boy." So the Glade used it for advertising. "I am a boy," Glade, with their address on it. Now, the top performer at the Glade, the most famous guy there was a guy named Prince Hanalei, actually Henry Kelso Daniel, but he billed himself as the world's only male exotic dancer, and they referred to his twirling torchlight tush. He had a couple of tassels on his posterior, shall we say, that they would set on fire, and then he would spin them. And there he is. And that, I must say, is a talent that you just don't see anymore. Well, Chinatown went through a rough time after that. There were a lot of drugs on the street. There were homeless. They weren't really called homeless at the time. There's more just sort of vagrants and bums, but a lot of problem with the pornography, a lot of dirty movie houses, pornographic theaters. There was a huge scandal when the city bought some of the buildings for redevelopment, but they could not throw out the pornographic movie houses that were in those buildings because it's a First Amendment thing, I guess. So the city was the landlord for some of the pornography that got busted. And so that created a lot of interesting newspaper stories, headline stories. So in 1949, they created the Honolulu Redevelopment Agency. This was in response to the US government providing a scary amount of money for urban renewal type projects, slum clearance projects. It took a while for that to get going, but by the 1960s, they were demolishing entire blocks, just Malka, the north side of the Chinatown area. Nancy Bannock with Sunset Magazine became kind of a one-woman crusade to save Chinatown, to save historic buildings. She got the mayor at the time to create the Historic Building Task Force. They went and actually documented a lot of the buildings, what history they could find, take pictures, try to generate some interest in saving these old buildings. There, of course, were the engineers in town that wanted to widen Nuuanu Street. They wanted to widen King Street. They wanted to wipe out all of Chinatown. Let's put in new buildings. Let's get rid of this old stuff. A lot of the buildings in Honolulu are leased. So when you're leasing a building and you're towards the end of your lease, you don't really have an incentive to fix it up. The landlord doesn't necessarily have an incentive because the new person who leases it may just tear it down and build new. Landlord doesn't take care of it necessarily themselves. So a lot of the buildings were falling into decay, and a lot of them literally did fall down. And so it was a big thing when the task force and just the general efforts of a lot of architects and people in Honolulu created a National Register Historic District for Chinatown in 1973. The actual application is pretty thin on details and information, but they got it through. And that created a huge impact on Chinatown. And coincidentally enough, a year later, the Historic Hawaii Foundation was formed here in Honolulu and in Hawaii to save buildings. And in 1976, two developers, Bob Gorell and Peter Smith, stepped up. These were former executives with American Factors, with AmFac, decided, hey, let's take what money we've got. Let's buy the Mundansa building, the big one at Hotel and Smith and Mauna Kea, and fix it up, and let's see what happens. And they did. It was a success. They did 20, 30 more buildings in Chinatown. They really turned the tide because they showed that, yes, these old buildings still have a lot of life. They've got a lot of character. Let's bring Chinatown back. So let's take a quick look at some of the buildings that are in Chinatown. There's the 19th century sort of Victorian commercial buildings. The three in the picture, the two in the upper right corner were built in 1886. The one on the left is 1901. At the bottom, we have three of the finest examples of East Lake Victorian architecture anywhere in Chinatown. Luckily, we rediscovered that architect was a gentleman named Isaac Palmer from Ohio originally, worked in Seattle, did a lot of big buildings there, came to Hawaii, and was only here for 6-7 years. But his big thing was Queen Anne and East Lake buildings. And these are the three finest buildings of his that have survived, and they are in our Chinatown. We have Richardsonian Romanesque, done with the traditional Hawaiian lava or bluestone. That building is the Nipujiji building, or the Hawaii Times building, built in 1897 for William G. Irwin. At the lower left, there's some Art Deco, Art Moderne sort of buildings in the streamlined style. The Hollow Market, that building is still there today. And I think it's supposed to be called Mediterranean Revival, but I call it Portuguese Revival because that's where Joseph Mendonça was from. And this sort of fancy window style you do find in Portugal, and you find a lot of buildings in Honolulu with that style. And like Chinatown in San Francisco, a lot of the early buildings weren't built by Chinese. They were built by others, and they weren't necessarily Chinese-looking buildings. And so there was a big push in Chinatown in San Francisco to, hey, we need buildings that, look like us, reflect our culture. And that's what happened here too. These buildings are all fairly recent. The Wofat building is 1938. The building on the right was built for the Yi Tong Society. Lower left is the Yeehop Market, and the lower right is one of my favorite buildings. I just really like it. It was built for the Lungdu Society in 1965 by architect James C.M. Young, and it was for their 75th anniversary. It was also mid-century modern. Building in the upper left is Central Pacific Bank that was formed by a bunch of young Chinese, Americans of Japanese ancestry. Came back after World War II and said, hey, we're young, we're motivated, we want to do something for the young people and not deal with just the old established Japanese hierarchy, and they created Central Pacific Bank. On the right is another bank It was Liberty Bank, built in 1952. It was designed by Vladimir Osipov, very famous architect here. Now that's one site we have a lot of information. The first building on that corner was built in 1813, and it was a grass house for Nathan Winship, who was a sea captain. Later, there was a large coral building there that Isaac Montgomery had his house and store in. Montgomery had a clerk in 1843 who worked for him briefly. He'd been a sailor aboard a whaling ship, was in Honolulu for just about a year, left, went on to become one of the greatest novelists in American history, a gentleman named Herman Melville, actually lived on that corner. The lower left is the CQ Yi Hop Plaza, named for the business that Chun Kwan built, a huge wholesale grocery business he built. There was already a business called Yi Hop in town, so he put his initials in front, Chun Kwan Yi Hop, or just CQ Yi Hop is how it became known. And that's very much the international style. And then a building sort of the brutalist, big, heavy concrete style for the Hawaii National Bank. The architect at the time said it was designed to blend in with the other buildings in Chinatown. And I'm not so sure that that's what actually happened. But anyway, and that's on the site of the fire station and the old police station that was all burned down in the 1886 fire. And then we have sort of fake Victorian. Mauna Kea Marketplace was built in 1990. Part of the slum clearance project was to get rid of a lot of the wooden buildings in Chinatown because they were dangerous. A lot of them were built after the fire in 1900. Of course, the fire limit line was still there. The fire limit line was kind of along Mauna Kea and Smith Street, kind of a zigzaggy line. Anything towards the downtown side had to be fireproof. Anything to the left didn't have to be. After the 1900 fire, there was talk of extending it to Nuuanu Stream, but at that point, the city was dealing with bubonic plague. The Board of Health was in charge of the government. Everything was burned down. The regular government didn't meet for a while, and there was just no way to pass the law. So wooden buildings got built, and it took until the 60s and 70s, in which they were generally pretty dilapidated, for them to be replaced. So they replaced it with buildings. They came up with design guidelines in the 1990s to kind of create this sort of mimicking Victorian commercial. It's not Chinese style. It's not, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not. I think it's something that, it's a good thing to discuss as to when you replace buildings in an historic district, what do you go back with? What style or what are you trying to mimic? You don't want to be anything too outrageously jarring, but you don't want to be just a petting zoo of traditional styles either. And then, of course, you've got the modern high-rise buildings. And it's interesting that one of the landowners in Honolulu was complaining to me that, yeah, we're restricted to only 40 feet high, but the city can build whatever they want. And so the city has built these towers, and part of the slum clearance was to get rid of those ramshackle wooden buildings, put people up in high-rise towers. And some of these are public housing, several are luxury condos. In fact, the tallest one kind of there in the middle is on the site of the old Kaumakapili Church. So here are a few pictures of Chinatown then and now. This is Nuuanu Street looking Mauka towards the mountains from hotel. The picture at the top is sometime between 1884 and 1886. And then below is basically what it looked like in 1880. The building on the left is 1886. The building on the right is 1887. So you've got pretty close to what the original streetscape looked like, except for that tall stuff in the back. This is the corner of Mauna Kea and Hotel. Before burning Chinatown, a lot of the newspaper was on this huge campaign. Oh, all these rat-infested shanties in Chinatown. And yeah, there were a few rundown buildings, but look at this. This was a restaurant. It's pretty nice. I would like to have dined upstairs at that restaurant. Not all the buildings were bad. And they talked also about, did they burn it just to get rid of the Chinese? Well, the burning was an accident, and it was to do with the plague. But the fact they were Chinese and looked down upon a little bit, that I think that did factor into it. In fact, a lot of Chinese after the fire, they moved out. In fact, there's a great quote of during all the talks of historic preservation, one Chinese person said, "Why do they want to say these little things? We couldn't wait to get out of there." So, as you know, then of course, new waves of immigrants have moved in since. Here's Mauna Kea at King. Kind of today, the building, the picture of, above is 1886 to 1900, somewhere in that range. This is Nuuanu at King, looking Mauka, the building, buildings on the up above, they were all burned in the 1886 fire. Down below, the building on the right is now the building for the Chinese, the new chamber, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce building is now located where it says Flores, or the lower right. And then here's the hotel at Nuuanu, showing 3 different times. The picture above is sometime before 1886, 1880, 1886, somewhere in that range. On the right, kind of the tallest building down there was called Buffum Hall. It was a huge performance facility. People read poetry, royalty attended. It was, they had all sorts of prestidigitators and traveling performers. It was also the site of the first roller skating rink in Honolulu. That all burned. Everything in that picture burned in 86. And then they came back in 1900. You see soldiers here. They're actually helping guard Chinatown, entrance to Chinatown. And then today, those same buildings virtually unchanged since that time. So anyway, for more information, there's an awful lot in this book. It's 458 pages, a lot of pictures, a lot of historical newspaper stories, historical ads, a lot more information about Chinatown, and happy to answer any questions. Hope you'll be coming up with some questions for the end of this. And now I'd like to pass this back to Gary, and some words for Mayor Blangiardi as to where he thinks Chinatown might go from here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Gary. Wow, some of those photographs are amazing. Right now, I want to go ahead and bring on the mayor of Honolulu, Rick Blangiardi.
Aloha, I'm Rick Blangiardi, Mayor of the City and County of Honolulu, and I really regret not being able to be with you in person this morning. And I know that this is a taped recording, but rather than have it scripted, if you will, I just want to talk to you as if I was there with all of you, because the subject of Chinatown was near and dear to my heart long before I ever came into office. And so coming into office and making it one of our top priorities was a very easy thing to do. But that said, the challenge of Chinatown itself, not so easy. Now, we all know it's an incredible location. We all know its origins and its history, that it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Chinatown in the United States. And its origins dating back to mid-1800s, and everything that's ensued since that time is really a great part of Hawaii's history. That said, our first order of business in looking at what was down there was we wanted to beautify it. And so we started out taking our entire cabinet down there. We walked the streets because, quite honestly, in order to get things done in the city, sometimes you need as many as 5 or 6 different departments to collaborate on something, to do something as simple as plant a tree. But we did it. We did the walkthrough. I wanted everybody to understand the shared commitment we were making at the time. This is going back after we were just recently, early on in office. So we began the process of looking at things like the bulb outs that were there. They were far excessive. We wanted to minimize it, at the same time do something that would speak to the antiquity of the place and also provide pedestrian safety. We wanted to pave streets. We wanted to repair broken sidewalks. We wanted to plant trees. We wanted to remove graffiti. We wanted to, just clean up with power washing and everything else we could possibly do to make it more presentable. Those were some of the cosmetic things we wanted to do, and we did do. And we had, and have had since in the 22 months we've been in office. And now keep in mind, a lot of our efforts were precluded because of COVID and things that we really wanted to do. But we've had 2 now, in conjunction with the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, major cleanups. There's been 7 or 8 graffiti removal projects. And, so we feel like it's getting better. We've increased the amount of power washings that we do down there. We probably need to even do more. But the big thing that we really went to work on was the other part that was taking away from the beauty and, quite honestly, the safety. And this is a good segue, is that, we knew there was a big criminal element in Chinatown. We also knew we had a real homeless problem, and that homeless problem was exacerbated by the River of Life. While a well-intentioned ministry for the past 35 years, it nonetheless had unintended consequences of not only aggregating homeless people, who in many cases were severely addicted to drugs, alcohol, and some just really suffering mental disease, that made its own challenge for us. So our ability to focus on the criminal element and at the same time not wanting to criminalize homelessness and deal with that was a two-pronged effort. And so I was very grateful when Steve Arn was elected our prosecuting attorney, because he and I actually walked Chinatown together one day, and we looked at and saw firsthand. And so with the advent, if you will, of bringing back his weed and seed program and his promise to provide better security, we began that effort. In addition, we were very successful in negotiating against the odds an arrangement with River of Life, whereas they moved out. And what they're moving out, that also really helped us. So our efforts right now are ongoing. I don't claim to have made any kind of victory necessarily, even though I know it is markedly improved. I go through Chinatown a lot just to see it. We've moved our core offices, our crisis outreach response and emergency team. We've moved that down to Pauahi Street. We're about to open a clinic across the street that will be working in conjunction with John A. Burns School of Medicine to provide really much needed mental health services and physical services. This is not to be confused with River of Life as an eating place. This is to get people off the streets, and then we can redirect them to projects like Honu or other places we hope to be able to house them. So all in, we have just really been focused on saying, let's do the heavy lifting on what it takes to make Chinatown seem more welcoming by beautifying it. Now, look, we're still in the process. We're going to improve our lighting down there. I'm still waiting. We have some supply delays on the cameras, but we're installing 52 cameras down there. We've certainly increased the police presence to 24/7, signed into an order over a year ago. We made a commitment of more than $2 million, but we didn't have enough police officers to do it the way I really wanted to. The original order was to have 4 shifts of 7, 4 supervisors and 3 teams of 2, 6, 7 to a shift, each working 6-hour blocks, 24/7, 7 days a week. We couldn't quite get there. We have filled it up some, but I wanted a greater police presence on the street because I really believe that that's an actual deterrent. So we've done that as well. So in addition to trying to beautify it and clean up graffiti and plant trees and power wash sidewalks and deal with the homeless and the criminal element, we've done all of that. And so we're going to continue to do all of that. One of the other areas that we're really focused on, obviously, is the activation of our Ala Park. American Savings Bank deserves a lot of credit for the bold stance that they took in moving their corporate headquarters there and all that they brought with it, and for that matter, the financial investments they made across the street in the park. We want to pick up on that as the city. We want to be able to start, staging events there. That's tied to our efforts to improve the Riverwalk. Recently, I was back in Chicago because we submitted the Riverwalk as a project to the Mayor's City on Mayor's Institute on City Design, and we were selected among 4 other cities in the country, and went back there and we're waiting their recommendations. We submitted pictures and whatever, went back, explained what we're trying to do. In fact, they came out here and took their own pictures and drawings. But we think the combination of the Riverwalk and our Ala Park, if we can get more people there, more events there, we activate it, it's going to just naturally put aside some of the elements that we deal with, and the human elements. And really, that's probably the biggest challenge, is people who make people feel that they're threatened or their safety is certainly in jeopardy. We're trying to eliminate that at every single level. So that's probably also a good segue that later this month, we're going to be doing our second grant of affordable housing money, and we've got a couple of projects in Chinatown earmarked where we're going to be investing capital from our affordable housing fund, substantial capital, in their financial stacks to help incentivize developers to really deliver on this, because it goes along with everything else we're saying, and activating the place. More people living there also really helps. So we want to be able to help these projects. You can count on us doing that. We've talked with the developers. You know that WOFAT is also right now going through its own renaissance and being remodeled. There's just so many different things in the promise of what we can make happen. So there's a couple of hotels going into Chinatown in that area, in the downtown area, all of which is going to lend itself to a cleaner, more safe neighborhood, if you will. We've got substantial capital investments planned for Kekaliki Mall. That's actually been on the drawing boards prior to my coming into administration. We've been there numerous times now. We know that it slopes. We know that it's prone to flooding. The merchants really sacrifice. But we think aesthetically, and there's just such a widely used place that it deserves some not only cleaning up, but we want to amend it. And you know, it's going to be right where the rail station will be there in about 5 or 6 years in anticipation of that. But those capital investments begin this year. It's going to call for a whole dynamic with respect to how the flooring is, the lighting and everything else to make it much more user-friendly, not only for the merchants that work there, but for everybody who comes to visit. It's just such a wonderful part of Chinatown. There's just such great energy there, and it's long needed capital improvement, and so we're going to do that. We're also, as I said earlier, with respect to our core program, which is our effort, which is really quite honestly, you know, we looked around, we knew that the sweeps were not working. We knew that long before we got in, that we're just simply displacing people temporarily. Our efforts were to really define a program that we felt somewhere in the mainland was working really well, that we could replicate here, evolve that thinking, implement it our way. And quite honestly, the core program is really a reflection of probably some of the best elements of what they've done in Denver and what they've done in the city of Houston. 2 cities, both of which have had major homeless problems, both of which have been nationally recognized for the quality of the work that they've done. And so thanks to Anton Krucke and Jim Ireland and Ian Santee from our EMS, you know, a lot of good work has gone into this, and we're starting to really see the results. We have our ambulances down there now. We have 4. We're soon to have 6. We've had a challenge to hire people like everybody else. We recently hired our first medical person. We've got some 26 to 28 core workers. We hope to bring that staff up to 50. As I said, right across the street on Pauahi, we bought some old liquor store in another place, and all of that's been remodeled. We'll be opening a clinic there. So having those folks, those resources right there in Chinatown, right down the street literally from where River of Life was, has already added greatly as a deterrent to what was before a collection of people who, quite honestly, were either criminals, drug dealers, or people who just had, you know, lurking there in the homeless community, you know, chronic criminals, if you will. People that just had long rap sheets and whatever. We're dealing with that. We're trying to take that head on between the police and our efforts with CORE, because as I said earlier, we don't believe in criminalizing homelessness. And anybody who needs help, legitimate help, we can provide a shelter for them and food and everything else that goes with it. So we're focused on that because it is simultaneous, right? When we talk about the cleaning up of Chinatown, it's really about the physical landscape as well as the humanity that was down there that was really causing a lot of the problems. And we're cognizant of both of those, and we're operating on both levels. So the other thing I would tell you that outdoor dining, which was something that kind of came about as a result of COVID, a lot of people started to like it. We felt that without cleaning up the streets, we could get that going. I've met with FET. I've met with several of the restaurants down there. They're excited about it. I think we're underway. It's all been approved. We got the laws passed. We're going to do it as a 1-year study. I think it's already now just beginning to happen. But we think that will add to the quaintness and the charm of Chinatown. So we're doing just about anything and everything. I'm not going to let up on the police protection. In fact, we now have the police station with its lights on and much more visible. You know, so this has become a love project for us. I don't know how else to say it. And everybody on our team, the city administration, has taken a lot of pride in watching things manifest and seeing the improvement and being able to drive through at night and not see people littering on the sidewalks is very gratifying. It's also very encouraging to those people who really want to live and work and play in Chinatown. So in closing, I just want to tell you, you have our commitment here. I feel like we're 22 months in office. I feel like we've made some really good progress. None of us are satisfied. And I'm not going to make any excuses, but candidly, you know, we started out In January of 21, in the midst of the pandemic, for the whole first year, a lot of things got in our way because of COVID. So I think we're making really great momentum. We're making great strides. We have good momentum, but I want to reassure you in closing today, that we feel like we've only just begun, but we need all of you to help us as well. Part of this is the people who also work there, live there themselves, and have a vested interest in Chinatown, such as so many of you, that you help us too. We just can't do it alone. It's not just simply a government operation. It requires all of us at every level. So my most sincere mahalo to all of you in this morning, and just let you know that we mean business, and you can always find me. I'm easy to find, but we're going to do this. I know it's been talked about before. I've seen everything that there was that went on in the past, and I saw what little came of it. I'm not here to denigrate anybody who came before me. I'm just telling you, we're going to get this done. So thank you. Aloha.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for that presentation. We're going to go ahead and get into the Q&A, but before that, I did want to say a few things about the Sungshin Association. If any of you are interested in buying Gary's book, I'd like to offer it to you by going to the Sungshin Association website at ttahawaii.com. And you can find a link there, an Amazon link. It's $25 for the book. For those of you that would like to help us out as we are going through some renovations of our building, and make a donation of $100 or more, you will receive a free book that we will go ahead and send you. And any other donations you'd like to make, we also accept that, and membership too. We're looking for new members. So just go to our website at www.ttahawaii.com. You can get all of that information there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into the Q&A. I just want to remind you folks that if you want to ask a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. Use the reactions button there to raise your hand. When you're being called, we'll just unmute yourself and ask your question. And then after you're finished, go ahead and remute yourself. Okay, thank you. Anyway, Gary, could you come online? Okay, so.
Oh, so far while we wait for people to come in with some questions or to raise their hands, I actually have a couple already, and I think there might be others. The first question I have is, your book is over 400 pages. What inspired you to do all this research? What got you started?
That's a good question. In a way, it was kind of a lockdown project. I ignored everything. I basically ignored everything else in my life. I've done sort of excessive researches before, but like I said, I was approached by the Hart folks to see about doing a walking tour, and I just found that the information just really wasn't accurate, or it was missing, and when I found that it's hard to do just individual buildings. You almost have to kind of do an entire area. And all of a sudden that just triggered my OCD response. And I thought, okay, I just need to look at all of Chinatown, draw my boundary and hold to it, but just dig deep, because several times, and like a classic example of, in the newspaper, there was an ad for the Kwong Sing carpentry company, and their ad said they were next door to Brighto. Okay, what is Brighto? You do a search and you find there's Brighto Hall. It was owned by a Portuguese gentleman named Cesar Brighto, and it was a place where Portuguese society met and other things went on. Well, you look where its address, oh, it's at the corner of Smith and King. Okay, well, there are 4 corners at Smith and King. Which one is it? Luckily, there were only 2 corners at that point in time, because Smith Street didn't extend south of King until 1917. So now we've got 2 corners. The other corner, the building that was next to the corner, was the United Chinese Society. I knew about that. So I could put the Kwong Sing location, actually where the the 1960s Columbia Key Building is located. So there's a lot of sort of, it's like a giant 4D puzzle where you can't just say, oh, what's the information on this building? Where is it? Because the information is often scattered. It's not always correct in the original newspapers either. They have their share of mistakes too, but it's trying to find it from many different sources. And you kind of have to do everything at once. Then once you have all that information, it's like, well, what am I going to do with that? I can't put that all in a walking tour. It'd take weeks. And so I thought, well, let's just, maybe I think there's a book here because no one had done a book before. Let's just kind of package it up. A fair amount of the information. There's still a ton of stuff that, you can't put everything in the book, but you at least put enough to try to pique people's interest and hopefully generate a little, a curiosity about Chinatown. I hope someone sees something in the book and they go, wait a minute, I want to know more about that. Or wait a minute, that was my auntie. I didn't know she did that. Or, oh, that building's older than I thought. Oh, maybe I should take better care of it. So to me, it's really kind of a starting point, but hopefully it's a big chunk of information that people can take and run with from there.
How
Long
long?
answer.
How much time did you spend on all this research from wherever you started to your book?
It was a little over a year, but like I say, I neglected everything. Oh, my boss isn't listening. I neglected everything else in my life while I was doing it. So and a lot of it has helped. A lot of it is online now. The maps are online. Not many of the photographs. I had to go to the Hawaii State Archives and actually dig through boxes of photographs because in the 1900s, right before they burned a lot of the buildings, they took a photograph of everything. And all those pictures are in boxes. Now they're not sorted necessarily. I was able to, luckily they took enough of each picture, had enough of the building on either side. We can reconstruct where all those photos were taken and where that building was. The newspapers through Chronicling America, the Library of Commerce site, and through newspapers.com, they have scanned Hawaiian newspapers back to 1840. So you can do word searches. I don't know how they could do optical character recognition on old newsprint, but it's about 85% accurate. So you can do a lot of rifle shot searches. Let's search this word. Let's search that word. Let's look this year. Okay, let's look for building permits in 1912 or whatever. So it's just a massive amount of just constant searching, trying to find. And every day was a new discovery. Because all of a sudden you might see a photograph you'd never seen before, or a architect's sketch of a building. Or I found one of the contractors who had built Murphy's, the Royal Saloon, knew General Custer. Like, whoa, that's amazing. The architect who remodeled the United Chinese Society building in the 50s, when he lived in China, he used to have dinner with Mao Zedong all the time. There's just a lot of really, part of it was just exciting because I didn't know what I was going to find the next day. That's the fun of research. I mean, they're slogging through stuff, yeah, but there's also the fun of discovering new stuff.
Actually, there's a question that just that follows your answer that's asking about the newspaper website, or which newspaper or which website did you find these newspaper articles?
I started off with one that's called chroniclingamerica.gov. I think it's a .gov. It's Library of Congress. And then I switched to newspapers.com. Now you have to pay for newspapers.com. It's like $75 a year, I think, or 6 months. I don't remember exactly which. It's a subscription service you pay for. But the Chronicling America has an awful lot of newspapers on it too. And that's free, totally free. And you can do word searches on that too, so that's good.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'm not familiar with Chronicling America. I am familiar with newspaper.com. I'm one of those, I don't want to pay either, but we have
I resisted for a while, but
okay, so as we wait, if anybody has a question, you can also put it in chat. I'll follow that, or if you can put it, raise your hand. I have another question. Is you mentioned earlier about the historical piece of it back in the 60s or in the 70s. does that historical status still hold today?
Oh, yeah. In
And
fact, they've recently redone the nomination as part of the rail project. I've seen some of the individual building descriptions, which are much more lengthy than they ever were before. I actually was talking with Dr. Susan Lebo just yesterday, and she mentioned that they are reviewing the overall Chinatown application or renomination now. And I'm hoping to get a copy of that soon, just to double check. I know there's some things that are missing in there. I know on some of the buildings, this data was really hard to find. And so I doubt if they have as much information as maybe they might like for some of the buildings.
are there any specific buildings with historic status, or is that whole area under historical landmark status?
The whole area is considered a historic district. So a building, if it's, it gets confusing, but they have what they call contributing and potentially contributing and then non-contributing buildings. And it's all a matter of when you draw your line for the district, you try to get as many contributing and potentially contributing. Potentially contributing means there've been some minor things that have been done to it that are reversible, wrong windows, wrong doors. You can change all that. The non-contributing is like, a big new high rise that's not going to count. So for a district, so a building's automatically included, but some of them I do believe have individual listings. I think there's several that deserve individual listings as well, just because of some of the stuff that I've been able to find about them. And it doesn't provide, it doesn't really provide any great protection. It means you cannot demolish, if it's on the National Register, it means you cannot demolish it with federal money. That's all it means. So, and it doesn't have anything to do with the interior, the paint color, any of that stuff. But what it does do, it opens up as Kristen mentioned, it opens up the opportunity for tax credits. Now you have to apply for those before you touch the building. You can't start doing your remodel and ask for tax credits later. But there are some advantages to having the designation financially. It's got to help you to do the right thing to save your building.
Interesting. Thank you. We have a question. Joe Yoshino has a question. If you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Gary. Thanks very much. Terrific program. I'm really enjoying this. I'm wondering anyways, let me go back. Trolling around, poking around the internet at one time a while back, I came across a business, phone directories from around the turn of the century that listed a business on King Street in the Chinatown area, and listed the proprietor's name as Y. Yoshino.
Okay.
And my grandfather was in Hawaii around that time before he came to Alameda. And I'm wondering, where can I go to find the first name of that person, Y. Yoshino?
I found the newspapers to be a good source of first names. Like you can search the name Yoshino. Now, depending how many Yoshinos there are, but not that many Y. Yoshino. So if you know what year he was in Honolulu, you can restrict your search to city and year. And so you could look at a range of years, and sometimes you can go, before or after if you're trying to find the first name. And it's frustrating because the style back then was just to use first initial and last name when you're formally referring to somebody. And it's maddening to try to find, okay, what's their first name? Where is it? And, if you dig enough, kind of either side of what date you're looking at, sometimes you're lucky to find it. Another interesting source, which I kind of stumbled across and used a lot for first names, is findagrave.com. You can also search for city, state, whatever. And if their headstone has been photographed or notated by anybody and uploaded, and they have millions of them, you can often find, I've often found first names only through that, only through findagrave.com.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sure, good luck with it.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
Um,
so Jeannie,
ahead, Gary.
do we have any more people? We're coming on the 90-minute mark, so I didn't want to.
I don't see anybody raising hand, but there is another question.
I see some
Okay, why don't
chat
we-
popping up.
One
yeah.
last question.
Okay, why don't we make that the last question then?
Gary, you had mentioned that many of the buildings were leased.
Mhm.
And, you know, that has an impact to how well people take care of the building when they're using it. Who owns all these? Who owns the primary owners? And I asked that question from the standpoint that I live in San Francisco. Many of the buildings in Chinatown are owned by family associations. What is the story in Hawaii, in Honolulu?
Well, this was a big surprise. 55% of the land in Chinatown is owned by the city and county of Honolulu. I
Oh.
did not realize that. That was a big surprise. And so, and I know we've got a great mayor right now with this, you know, heart really set on Chinatown. I've worked in government, so I can say this. I don't know if that's a good thing or not that the government controls that much, because that means there's going to be politics, there's bureaucracy. That means that once again, they can build up a high rise if they just feel like it. I don't know if that's a good thing. Now, a lot of the other built properties, a lot of them are family trusts. Some of them are, I mean, at one point, the Bishop Estate had a lot of land. They still have, well, I guess it's now Kamehameha Schools has several tracts of land there. But by far and away, the city is the largest landowner in Chinatown.
Okay, Gary, we have both Garys, we have one last question, and this is absolutely the last. Anna Ing is asking a question and thought it was interesting, the shift in the nightclub showgirl district from the 1940s, from Chinese to white post 1950s.
Mhm.
Do you know what caused the shift?
Sailors.
Ah.
It was just this huge influx of servicemen, and where do you go to party? And hotel was the party street. I mean, the businesses were kind of on King Street. Hotel was kind of the bar and party street, and then Palahi is kind of the red light district, kind of, sort of. But yeah, it had to do with all the servicemen in the 30s and 40s, and they just flocked to hotel. And then with changing times, I mean, it's really funny. I didn't realize how many hillbilly and country western acts there were in the early 50s. I didn't realize that was a thing at all in Honolulu, or really anywhere for that matter, early 50s. And then suddenly it became burlesque, and then the burlesques kind of degraded to strippers, and then it just degraded from that to porn. And I remember as a student in Houston in the 70s, same thing happened there. I think it happened in major cities everywhere. There was just a huge change. And maybe in a way, the internet's a good thing, because now the porn's on the internet and it's not on Hotel Street. And Hotel Street could be something else and something better, you know.
That's funny. Okay,
But-
that was the last question. Thank you. That was very interesting.
Well,
Chinatown's always changing, and that's to me, that's the interesting thing. It's gone through so many changes. Some are drastic, some are institutional. I guess the interesting thing will be what will Chinatown, how will it continue to change, and how do you maintain that sense of the past and history as it moves forward? And I think that'll be, that's as the mayor said, that's for all of us to kind of figure out what that is.
Gary, I'm kind of curious if 55% of the land in Chinatown's owned by the city. Was some of that taken through condemnation or eminent domain, or was
urban renewal? They took over a lot of land.
Yeah.
They just swept in and said, we're taking it.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do that today. But in the 60s and 70s, they would claim something is decrepit, or I've forgotten the terminology they used.
Eminent domain.
Yeah, but they would come in and just say, this building is dilapidated and you're not taking care of it, so we're taking it.
And I understand that you're doing a study now on the other side of New Wano that you're working on, heading towards the state buildings and things. Is that true?
Yeah, I lied. I said I would draw my boundary, and I really tried to hold to it. But in actually chasing architect Isaac Palmer, I have now found about a dozen buildings that he did in Honolulu, including some of my favorites that used to be in downtown. They're long gone. And so what I'm looking now is basically have expanded over towards Richard Street. And I'm going to be looking at sort of the loft buildings and forgotten architects in downtown Honolulu.
Yeah, because I know that concentrated right around Bishop Street, heading towards the water, you have Dillingham Transportation Building,
Mhm.
the AmFac building, or former AmFac building. C. Brewer was down there. And so a lot of these old families, I would guess they still control that. Alexander and Baldwin building was all down there, and there's still landowners down there. There's no city. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not that much. I haven't really looked at the ownership that closely in downtown, but there's not that much city ownership. Not like Chinatown.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I wanted to wrap everything up. I want to thank everybody for being here. Jeannie, could you put up that graphic? If you folks have any questions for Gary that you think about after this, please email us at sungshinhawaii@gmail.com. Can you put that up, Jeannie?
Yes.
And if you also want any information about anything about our club and things, just go to ttahawaii.com. So those are the two. So other than that, I just wanted to go ahead and thank everybody. I wanted to start with Edwina and Luther and Nancy with our group, with our association. I wanted to thank Jeannie, who's actually from San Francisco with the Bay Area Chinese genealogy group that's helping out. Other than that, I also want to mention, thank Kirsten Faulkner of the Historic Hawaii Foundation and her aide, Andrea, who helped out a lot. And of course, Mayor Blangiardi. I was working with Lisa Chun, so I want to thank her too. And of course, we have to thank Gary Coover. Excellent presentation, Gary. Gary, do you have any last words that you want to add?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to the Sungshin Society. I believe that you are the oldest society in the original building in Chinatown. I don't think anyone else has been in their building that long, no matter who they are, not even business, individual, whatever. So I think that is a real testament to the society, and I really hope that that your efforts to restore the building continue, and that the society continue to going 85 years, whatever it is. I think you guys are doing great, and just wish you all the best of luck as you go forward.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, everybody, we will, if you are registered, we will send you a link later on when the video gets uploaded. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. If you, like I said, if you need to reach us, just email us at sungshinhawaii@gmail.com. So aloha. Thank you.
Zaijian.